branded mad and exiled by her stepmother, until the feared Duke of Grimsholt came for her. I have been asked, more than once, how a man of my standing, a man they called the feared Duke of Grimsholt, a man who had never once been observed to soften in any public drawing-room or candlelit salon, came to ride through a November downpour at 2 in the morning with nothing but a lantern, a solicitor's letter, and a conviction so fierce it frightened even me. The short answer is, I found out the truth. The longer answer is her. Her name, as I eventually came to know it, as I came to say it quietly, in the privacy of my own study long before I had any right to, was Maren Hollies. Daughter of the late Lord Hollies of Fernbridge, a modest title, an honest estate, a man of no great power but of considerable decency. He had died when Maren was 19, leaving behind a will that named her sole heir to Fernbridge and its holdings, with the provision that she reach her 25th year in good standing. The stepmother, a woman I will name only as Lady Elspeth, because even now I find I cannot dignify her scheme with more attention than it requires, had moved with extraordinary speed. Within a year of Lord Hollies's death, she had called in a physician from a town 3 counties away, a man whose name does not appear in any respectable medical registry, and she had produced 2 witnesses I later established were in her employ. The charge, filed with a provincial magistrate so obscure he might have been selected specifically for his disinterest, was lunacy. Mild but dangerous, the physician's letter read, prone to delusion, unsafe to manage her own affairs. Maren Hollies had been taken in the night. I did not know any of this when I first encountered her name. I came to it through a chain of circumstances that now seems, in retrospect, almost too deliberate to be accidental, though I do not believe in providence as a general principle. My solicitor, a thorough man named Prewitt, had been auditing a land claim adjacent to the Fernbridge estate, a minor dispute about drainage rights, and in the course of that work had encountered a paper trail that struck him as, in his words, irregular in a manner I cannot quite account for, your grace, but which smells, if you will forgive me, very wrong. Prewitt placed the file on my desk on a Thursday morning. I read it in an afternoon. By evening I was asking questions. The asylum was called Harwick House. It sat at the end of a chalk road in the flattest, grayest corner of a county I had never previously had reason to visit. The journey took most of a day, and I made it alone, or nearly so, with only Prewitt in the second carriage and 2 of my men on horseback. I had told no one else. Whatever I found at Harwick House, I wanted no audience. I had also told myself, with the careful dispassion I had practiced for most of my adult life, that I was conducting this inquiry purely as a matter of legal irregularity. Prewitt's instinct was good. If a wrong had been done, it was the kind of wrong that a man in my position had both the standing and the means to address. It was a civic obligation, nothing more. I am not sure I entirely believed myself even then. The road to Harwick House was unpaved past the last village. The carriage jolted and the sky pressed down low and gray, and I watched through the window as the hedgerows grew wilder and less tended, as the land became flat and wide and empty. And I thought about a girl, a young woman, 19 and newly bereaved, taken in the night and brought somewhere like this, and told that she was mad. I am not, as I said, a man given to softening, but I felt something in that carriage that I do not have a better word for than fury. The superintendent of Harwick House was a man called Oram, small, damp-handed, visibly alarmed the moment my carriage rolled into his yard, and he saw the crest on the door. He met me in a tiled hall that smelled of camphor and coal smoke, and he smiled with the particular eager nervousness of a man who has been doing something he knows is wrong, and has always assumed would one day catch up with him. Your Grace, he said, we were not, that is to say, we had no prior notification of. I did not send prior notification, I said, because I did not want you to have time to tidy anything. He blinked, he gestured toward a chair. I did not sit. I am here, I said, regarding a Miss Maren Hollies, who has been held at this establishment for the past 4 years on a certification of lunacy signed by a physician named Caro, witnessed by 2 individuals named Tanner and Bell. I have reason to believe that certification is fraudulent. I have further reason to believe you are aware it is fraudulent. I will now ask you to take me to Miss Hollies, and after that, Prewitt. I gestured to my solicitor, who had stepped in behind me, will require access to your records for the past 5 years. Oram's smile had entirely disappeared. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. "The alternative," I said quietly, "is that I return to London, consult with my legal counsel, and in approximately 6 weeks this establishment will be the subject of a formal inquiry before the Lord Chancellor. I have found, in my experience, that 6 weeks is a very long time to spend waiting for a thing you could have resolved in an afternoon." He took me to her. I have tried in the years since to describe that first encounter accurately, and I have consistently found the task beyond me. What I can say is this. She was sitting at a small table near a window that looked out onto a gray-walled garden. She was reading a book I could not make out the title of at that distance, though I later learned it was a volume on natural philosophy, borrowed from Oram's own shelf without his knowledge. She wore a plain dark dress, very clean. Her hair was simply dressed. She looked up when Oram opened the door, and the look on her face was the look of someone who has taught themselves, with considerable discipline, not to hope. Then she saw that I was not Oram. She saw, I think, that I was not anyone she had ever seen before in this place. She saw the quality of my coat, the set of my shoulders. Prewitt told me afterward that I looked, at that moment, like a man arriving somewhere he intended to take a part. I do not dispute it. She closed the book carefully. She set it on the table. She rose. "Miss Holly's," I said. "Yes," she said. Her voice was very even. It was the voice of a woman who has had 4 years to strip every tremor out of it, to make it a tool rather than a betrayal. "My name is Aldrich Vane. I am the Duke of Grimsholt. I have come because I believe you should not be here." There was a long silence. She looked at me with eyes that were dark and careful and completely, absolutely awake. I had been told by Lady Elspeth's physician, I had obtained a copy of his notes, that Marin Hollies suffered from disordered perception and an incapacity for rational engagement. I looked at her now and thought, this woman is the most precisely rational person I have met in recent memory. "How did you find me?" she said. "Land records," I said, "and a solicitor with good instincts." Something crossed her face then, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, as if she had been introduced unexpectedly to something she had stopped believing in. I felt it, that ghost of a smile, in a way I had not felt anything in some considerable time. "I have," she said, "been here for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. "I know," I said. "I am sorry it was not sooner." She looked at me for another moment, then she said with perfect composure, "What happens now?" What happened now was Prewitt. Prewitt, over the course of the next 3 hours, dismantled Harwick House's records with the patient thoroughness of a man who has spent 40 years being the most useful person in any room. He found the original certification, the payments from Lady Elspeth, routed through a land agent, but traceable once you knew where to look, and a letter, written in Oram's own hand, acknowledging that the matter was of a sensitive nature requiring continued discretion. That letter alone was enough. Oram, by the end of it, was sitting in his own office chair with the look of a man watching walls collapse. While Prewitt worked, I sat with Marin Hollies in that same gray room. I told her what I had found. I told her what I intended to do about it. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than you might think, and asked 3 precise questions, each of which told me more about her mind than an hour's conversation would have done. "My stepmother," she said at the end, "what becomes of her?" "That depends," I said, "on how far you wish to pursue it." "All the way," she said without hesitation. And then quietly, "Fernbridge is mine. My father meant it to be mine." "Yes," I said, "it is and it will be." She looked at the window. At the gray garden she had looked at, I imagined, 10,000 times. "I should like," she said carefully, "not to have to wait very much longer." "You will not," I said. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed, because there is a version of this story in which I am nobler than I actually was, in which my every action was entirely motivated by the dispassionate pursuit of legal justice. That version is not entirely false, but it is not entirely honest either. The truth is that I could not stop thinking about her. Not, I want to be precise here, in any way that dishonored her or the situation. What I could not stop thinking about was the quality of her mind, the particular kind of courage that had kept her upright in a place designed to convince her she was broken, the careful precision of her voice, and the ghost of that smile. I thought about what it meant that a woman of that particular quality of spirit had spent 4 years locked away, while the world went on without her. I am not, as I have said, a man given to softening. but I found in those weeks that I was entirely willing to make an exception. Pruitt assembled the legal case. It did not take long. The evidence was, once unearthed, remarkably clear. I filed with the magistrate's court. I filed separately regarding the original certifying physician. I sent a letter to Lady Elspeth that was, by all accounts, sufficiently direct that her own solicitor wrote to Pruitt to request that no further correspondence be sent until nerves had settled. I arranged for Marin to stay, while matters resolved at the Grimsholt estate in town in the East Wing with her own maid, entirely properly. I did not do this for any reason except that I could not think of anywhere else that was both safe and under my guarantee. I told myself this. I mostly believed it. She arrived at the East Wing on a Tuesday in December, still in the plain dark dress. She had nothing else. And she stood in the entrance hall and looked at it the way I imagine a person looks at a horizon they had given up expecting. "It is too much," she said. "It is a wing," I said. She looked at me. "You know what I mean." "Yes," I said, "and I am asking you for the time being to allow it." She considered this. She said after a moment, "You are quite used to being allowed things, I imagine." "Yes," I said, "I find I am less comfortable with it than usual." She smiled then, not the ghost of one, but an actual, full smile, brief and unguarded, and I felt the full force of it somewhere in the region of my chest. She turned and followed the maid up the stairs, and I stood in my own entrance hall and understood, with the sudden clarity of a man who has just walked into a wall in the dark, exactly what had happened to me. The hearing was held in January. Lady Elspeth came with 3 solicitors, and a manner of composure that I suspected had cost her a great deal to assemble. Pruitt laid out the evidence. The physician Caro was not present. He had, upon being contacted, relocated with some urgency to another county. Tanner and Bell, the witnesses, had each provided written statements recanting. In exchange for arrangements I will not detail here except to note that they were considerably less comfortable than being brought before the court would have been. Marin sat beside Pruitt and spoke when asked and was, as she had been every time I had seen her, entirely and precisely awake. She did not look at her stepmother. She looked at the magistrate, and she answered every question with a directness that I watched the magistrate struggle to account for, given what was written in Caro's notes. He kept looking from her to the papers, from the papers to her, as if recalibrating. When it was done, when the finding came back, as I had known it would, in her favor, I watched Lady Elspeth's composure finally disintegrate. She turned to her solicitor and said, in a low, furious voice, something about impertinence and interference, and her solicitor had the wisdom not to agree with her. Marin stood. She accepted the magistrate's words with a nod. Then she turned, and she looked at me across the room, and I had a sudden overpowering sense that this woman, given different circumstances, given the last 4 years back, would have been entirely capable of managing whatever life set before her without any assistance whatsoever. I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that this did not diminish what I felt. It considerably increased it. She came to me that evening in the library. I was standing at the window. I had not been able to sit, which I noted, in the detached way of a man observing himself from a distance as unusual. I heard the door and turned. "It is returned," she said. "Fernbridge, Pruitt has the documents. He says by spring I may go home." "Yes," I said. She stood in the doorway. The library was lit by the fire and 2 lamps, and the light was warm, and she looked. She looked, I thought, like someone who had just set down a weight she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was there. And I felt, with something very close to grief, that in setting it down she was also setting down the reason she was here. That by spring she would go home, and Fernbridge would be hers, and the wing of the Grimsholt townhouse would be empty, and I would stand in my own library and be, as I had always been before I had read Pruitt's file on a Thursday afternoon, entirely alone with my own very adequate and entirely insufficient life. "What is it?" she said. She had crossed the room without my noticing, and she was watching me with those careful dark eyes, and I thought, 4 years in a place that tried to break her, and here she stands. "Nothing," I said, and then, because I have never in my life been good at nothing, I was thinking that I should like very much not to see you only at a distance after spring. She was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. "That is not nothing," she said. "No," I said. "It is not." Another silence. She looked at me with the same precision she had looked at the magistrate, the same absolute attentiveness, and I found I did not mind being looked at that way. I found I would have been very willing to stand there and be looked at like that for a very long time. "You are quite feared," she said at last, "in general." "I am aware. Does it bother you that I am not?" I looked at her. I thought about a gray room and a gray garden and a woman who had kept her voice even for 4 years, and her mind entirely her own. I thought about a ghost of a smile and an actual smile, and the way she had said all the way without a moment's hesitation. "No," I said, "I find it is, in fact, the most important thing about you." She studied me for another moment. Then she said quietly, "Fernbridge will need work, the grounds particularly. My father's steward is elderly." "Yes," I said carefully. "I had thought," she said, "that it might be useful in that work to have someone with considerable resources and some experience of managing large estates. Not to take it over, only to assist, occasionally." "Occasionally," I said. "As a neighbor," she said, "of a particular kind." I looked at her. "I do not have an estate adjacent to Fernbridge." "No," she said, and the smile came again, not brief this time, not unguarded, but deliberate and warm and entirely her own. "That is a problem you might consider solving. I told you I had been asked how a man like me came to ride through a November downpour at 2 in the morning with nothing but a lantern and a letter, and a furious certainty. What I have not told you until now is that I rode back again the following year on a morning in June, through a countryside that was all soft green and gold, with rather more in my pocket than a solicitor's letter. And Marin Hollies came out of Fernbridge House to the top of the steps, in a dress that was not plain and dark, and she looked at me with those careful dark eyes and said, 'You are early.' 'I know,' I said. I found I could not be patient. 'You never could,' she said, with the satisfaction of someone who has come to know a thing quite well, and she came down the steps. They called me the feared Duke of Grimsholt, and perhaps they still do, in those drawing rooms I rarely trouble myself to visit. But I know what I am. I am the man who found Marin Hollies, and who had the great good fortune that she, having been found, decided I was worth keeping. That is, I think, a rather better thing to be.